Imagine eating vegetables like these as your diet. Well, how would that affect you? Well, lucky you, I'm here to tell you all about that during my speech. In this speech today, I'll be covering a multitude of topics regarding plant-based diets and their effect on individuals. Things like the health outcomes of plant-based diets, the cost differences of plant-based diets compared to meat-eating diets, and the mental health outcomes of plant-based diets. First, I want to cover the health outcomes of a plant-based diet. There is multiple health outcomes and multiple things on plant-based diets, but first we need to consider what is a plant-based diet. A plant-based diet is a diet consisting of mainly vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds, but they are void of any meat from animals or anything like that. However, there's multiple terms like vegetarian and vegan, where vegan is strictly only vegetables and fruits, while vegetarian sometimes sways and goes toward animal products like milk and cheese. Now, let's actually start with our actual physical health outcome. So our first topic would be it lowers the risk of heart disease and cardiovascular diseases like IHD. The Proceedings of the Nutrition Society published an article in 2022 titled Plant-Based Diets and the Long-Term Health Findings from the EPIC Oxford Study. In this study, they found that the combined risk of IHD in vegetarians and vegans was 22% lower than that in meat eaters, and this was reduced to 17% lower when adjusting for a BMI. This means that when eating plant-based diets, you have a lower risk of heart diseases and things like that. The next health outcome is cancers. Plant-based diets prevent you from a higher risk of certain cancers. According to the Proceedings of the Nutrition Society article in 2022, titled Plant-Based Diets and Long-Term Health Findings from the EPIC Oxford Study, this study found that the risk for any type of cancer was 10% lower in vegetarians than that in meat eaters, and 18% lower in vegans. Now, certain cancers like stomach cancer was 62% lower in vegetarians. However, cancers of the cervix was 90% higher. That means plant-based diets can decrease your risk of overall cancer. However, it can increase certain cancers. Now that we've talked about the health outcomes of plant-based diets, let's see what the cost differences of a plant-based diet and a meat-eating diet are. We first need to talk about how geography and different locations affect how a plant-based diet costs. Depending on the product interest of the location or the popularity of the product, it can drive prices through the roof. And depending on one location to the next location, it can be vastly different. However, for this, I will be talking about the mean averages of the costs so you know exactly the differences between a cost of a plant-based diet and a meat-eating diet. According to the Nutrition and Dietetics published an article in 2026 titled Cost and Affordability of Plant-Based Diet, Global Evidence from 2000 to 2025. In this study, they found that the mean total foods cost per day decreased in the vegan group by approximately 16%, and the whole food plant-based diet cost average was about $9.78, while the meat-eating diet was about $15.72 per day. This means that the plant-based diet was significantly less than a meat-eating diet. Now that we know what the cost differences are, let's focus on how plant-based diets can affect your mental health. And I know how it might sound ridiculous, how the food you eat can affect your mental health, but it actually does, through a process called the gut-brain axis, which is basically just how your stomach talks to your brain, through different neurotransmitters. Basically, in your stomach, you have multiple bacteria, and the food you eat sends signals to those bacteria, which then sends different signals to your brain, which can relay different information and cause different moods and different highs or lows. The authors from Sirius published an article in 2025 titled Exploring Plant-Based Diets and Mental Health Outcomes, a Systematic Review. And in this study, after consuming a vegan-only diet, 62% reported large improvement or full remission of depressive symptoms, and 59% reported large improvement or full remissions of anxiety. This means that eating plant-based diets significantly lowers your increased mental health, depression, or anxiety, and things like that. Now, you've learned a lot in this speech, but let's recap all the points one more time. Plant-based diets can cause you to have less cancer risks, lower cardiovascular disease risks, and they can be lower in cost. They also help with your mental health a ton. Thank you for listening, and I love your wonderful attention. Now, for my audience. Oh yeah.